The storm's gift. The blizzard hit the Colorado Rockies with a vengeance that night, turning the world into a swirling chaos of white. Dr. James Harrison secured the last shutter on his research station, ice crystals already forming on his beard despite the thick scarf wrapped around his face. 3 years of isolation up here had taught him to respect the mountain's fury, 3 years since he'd walked away from the bustling veterinary practice in Denver, unable to bear the weight of animals he couldn't save and owners he couldn't console. Just another quiet night, James muttered to himself, heading back inside where the warmth of the wood stove beckoned. His German shepherd, Rocky, lifted his head from his bed near the fireplace but didn't seem alarmed. The dog had been his only companion since he'd taken this posting, studying the wildlife patterns in the remote wilderness. James was halfway through his evening coffee when Rocky suddenly bolted upright, ears perked, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What is it, boy?" James asked, setting down his mug. The dog rushed to the door, whining and scratching at the wood with unusual urgency. "Rocky, there's nothing out there but snow," James said, but his companion's distress was unlike anything he'd seen before. Against his better judgment, James grabbed his heavy coat and flashlight. "Fine, but this better be worth freezing for." The moment he opened the door, Rocky shot past him into the blizzard. James cursed and followed, his flashlight beam barely penetrating the wall of snow. "Rocky, get back here," he shouted, his voice swallowed by the wind. He trudged forward, following the dark shape of his dog until Rocky stopped about 50 yards from the station, barking frantically at something on the ground. James approached, his flashlight sweeping across what he initially thought was a fallen tree, but trees didn't have limbs that bent at such precise angles, and they definitely didn't have skin that reflected his light with an otherworldly purple sheen. His heart hammered against his ribs as he dropped to his knees beside the figure. "Oh my God," he breathed, his scientific mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. The being before him was unmistakably humanoid, roughly his height, with a feminine form clad in some kind of form-fitting material that shimmered even under the layers of accumulating snow, but her skin, what little he could see of it, was a deep rich purple, like amethyst brought to life. Her face was turned toward him, eyes closed, lips slightly parted. Snow had already begun to cover her dark hair, which seemed to have an iridescent quality even in the dim light. Blood, or something similar but darker, had frozen in streaks across her torn suit. She had obvious injuries, burns on her arms and what looked like a deep gash along her ribcage. James's veterinary training kicked in immediately. Alien or not, this was a living being in critical condition. "Can you hear me?" he said, knowing it was probably futile, but unable to remain silent. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse, and found it, irregular and faint, but definitely there. The moment his skin contacted hers, a strange tingling sensation ran up his arm, like static electricity but warmer, more alive. "Rocky, home," James commanded, and the dog obeyed instantly. James carefully assessed the being's condition. She was surprisingly light despite her height, and he managed to lift her into his arms. Her head lolled against his chest as he carried her back toward the station, each step a battle against the wind. Inside, James laid her on his examination table, the same one he used for injured wildlife. He cranked up the heat and began cutting away the damaged portions of her suit, revealing more of that extraordinary purple skin. Her anatomy seemed similar to human, at least superficially, but there were subtle differences, the way her ribcage curved, the slight luminescence beneath her skin as if light moved through her veins instead of blood. "What happened to you?" James whispered as he worked, cleaning wounds with antiseptic, noting how the substance that served as her blood was thicker, almost gel-like, and a deep indigo color. Burns covered her forearms, likely from some kind of explosion or fire. The gash on her side was deep, and he knew it needed to be closed. As he prepared a suture kit, her eyes suddenly fluttered open. They were entirely black, like pools of ink, but as she focused on him, points of violet light appeared in their depths like distant stars. She made a sound, a melodic series of tones that he couldn't possibly interpret, but her eyes were filled with fear and confusion. "Hey, it's okay," James said softly, the same tone he used with frightened animals. "You're safe here, I'm going to help you." He showed her the needle and thread, gesturing to her wound, trying to communicate his intentions. She watched him with those mesmerizing eyes, and though she couldn't understand his words, something in his demeanor seemed to calm her. She nodded slightly, just once, and closed her eyes again. Whether she'd lost consciousness or was simply trusting him, James wasn't sure. He worked quickly and efficiently, stitching the wound closed with the same care he'd give any patient. Every time his fingers brushed her skin, that tingling sensation returned, and he found himself wondering if it was some kind of defense mechanism or perhaps just the natural electricity of her alien physiology. Hours passed as James tended to her injuries. He'd set up and for with fluids, hoping her biology was compatible enough that it wouldn't harm her. Throughout the process, he found himself talking to her, explaining each step as if she could understand. I'm applying burn ointment now, this might sting a bit, or I need to check your vitals again, your pulse is still irregular. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking. Though the blizzard showed no signs of letting up, James slumped into a chair beside the table, exhaustion finally catching up with him. Rocky had positioned himself near the alien woman, keeping watch with an almost protective stance. What am I going to do with you? James asked the unconscious being. He should probably contact someone, authorities, scientists, but something held him back, the fear in her eyes when she'd first woken, the obvious violence of whatever had happened to her. Something told him that revealing her presence might put her in more danger. As if sensing his gaze, her eyes opened again. This time, the violet points of light seemed brighter, more focused. She turned her head slowly to look at him, and James felt his breath catch. There was an intelligence in those alien eyes, a depth of emotion he recognized despite the vast gulf between their species. She raised one hand, trembling with effort, and pointed to herself. Then she made a sound, soft and musical, Kaya. It sounded like, though James couldn't be sure if that was her name or something else entirely. Kaya, he repeated, and her lips curved into what might have been a smile. She pointed at him then, her expression questioning. James, he said, tapping his chest, I'm James. Her eyes began to close again, but not before she managed one more gesture. She pressed her hand over where her heart would be, then extended it toward him, palm up. The meaning was clear, thank you. As she slipped back into unconsciousness, James realized that everything he thought he knew about the universe had just changed, and despite the impossibility of the situation, despite the fear and confusion, he felt something else too, a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since he'd left his practice. This purple-skinned stranger from the stars needed him, and he wasn't going to let her down. He settled in for a long watch, keeping vigil as the blizzard raged outside and an alien woman recovered under his care. In the warm glow of his research station, surrounded by the silence of the mountains and the steady breathing of his unexpected patient, James Harrison took the first step into a larger universe than he'd ever imagined. Silent understanding. The blizzard finally broke on the third morning, leaving the world outside blanketed in pristine white that sparkled under the emerging sun. James had barely slept, checking on Kaya every few hours, monitoring her recovery with a mixture of medical concern and growing fascination. Her wounds were healing at a remarkable rate, far faster than any human injury would. The gash on her side had already begun to knit together, and the burns on her arms were fading to lighter patches on her purple skin. She woke fully that morning, her star-filled eyes tracking his movements as he prepared breakfast. James had discovered through careful trial the previous day that she could tolerate certain foods. She'd managed some broth and seemed particularly interested in fresh fruit, though citrus had made her recoil with an expression of pure disgust that had almost made him laugh despite the strangeness of the situation. Good morning, James said softly, approaching with a plate of sliced apples and some bread. He'd learned to move slowly around her, telegraphing his intentions. Kaya pushed herself up to a sitting position on the cot he'd moved near the fireplace, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her healing wounds. She gestured to the food, then to her mouth, and James nodded. Yes, breakfast. You need to keep your strength up. He set the plate on the small table beside her and was surprised when she caught his wrist gently as he pulled away. The tingling sensation that always accompanied her touch intensified, and suddenly James felt something, not quite words, not quite images, but impressions flooding his mind, gratitude, warmth, curiosity, and underneath it all, a profound loneliness that resonated with his own. He gasped, and she released him immediately, concern flickering across her alien features. Did you just, James started, then stopped. How could he explain what he'd felt? Can you, is that how you communicate? Kaya tilted her head, studying him with those mesmerizing eyes. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out again, this time placing her palm against his temple. The connection that formed was stronger, clearer, James saw flashes of her world, a planet bathed in the light of twin suns, cities that seemed to grow organically from the landscape like massive crystalline structures, beings like her moving through streets filled with bioluminescent plants. Then the images shifted, darker now, laboratories, experiments, her hands manipulating complex equipment, discovering something that made energy dance between her fingers like captured lightning, then fear, running, a ship, an explosion, falling through Earth's atmosphere in a damaged escape pod, the crash, the cold, the pain. When she pulled away, James found himself breathing hard, tears streaming down his face from the emotional intensity of what she'd shared. "You're a scientist," he said, his voice rough, "and someone wants what you discovered." Kaya nodded, her expression grave. She pointed to herself, then made a gesture like an explosion, then pointed outside. Her meaning was clear, they would come looking for her. "Then we'll be ready," James said with more confidence than he felt. "For now, you need to heal." Over the following days, they developed a rhythm of communication that went beyond simple gestures. Each time they touched, the connection grew stronger, more refined. James began to understand not just her thoughts but her feelings, the nuances of her alien emotions that were simultaneously foreign and deeply familiar. She was lonely, yes, but also determined, brilliant and compassionate, afraid but not broken. For her part, Kaya seemed equally fascinated by him. She would sit for hours watching him work on his laptop, analyzing wildlife data. Her fingers would trace the photographs on his walls, the images of animals he'd treated, the few pictures of his family that he'd brought with him. When she touched his hand while looking at a photo of him in his veterinary clinic, he felt her understanding wash over him. She knew why he'd left, knew the weight of loss and the need to escape. On the 5th day, Kaya attempted to stand on her own. Her leg had been injured in the crash, though not broken, and she'd been reluctant to put weight on it. James moved to help her, but she waved him off with a determined expression. She gripped the edge of the table and slowly, carefully, pulled herself upright. Her first step was shaky, and James instinctively reached out to steady her. The moment his hands touched her waist, that now familiar electricity sparked between them, but this time it felt different, less like simple communication and more like connection, pure and profound. Kaya looked up at him, her black eyes reflecting his face, and James realized how close they were standing. He could feel the warmth radiating from her purple skin, could see the way her chest rose and fell with each breath. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they simply stood there, two beings from different worlds, connected by something neither could quite name. "I wish I could tell you everything I'm thinking," James whispered, knowing she wouldn't understand the words but hoping she'd feel the sentiment. In response, Kaya lifted her hand and placed it over his heart. The connection flooded through him, and he gasped at the intensity. This wasn't just shared thoughts or memories, this was emotion in its purest form, her gratitude for his care, yes, but also something deeper, an attraction that transcended species, a recognition of kindred spirits. James covered her hand with his own, letting his feelings flow back through the connection, his loneliness these past 3 years, his fear when he'd found her, his growing affection for this mysterious being who'd crashed into his isolated world. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. Kaya's skin had deepened to a richer shade of purple, and James noticed for the first time how it seemed to shimmer with emotion. "Are you blushing?" he asked with a small smile. She tilted her head in that curious way of hers, then reached up and gently touched his own flushed cheek. Her lips curved in what was definitely a smile now, and she made a soft sound that might have been laughter. That afternoon, James helped her outside for the first time since the crash. The fresh air seemed to invigorate her, and she stood on his porch breathing deeply, her eyes closed in contentment. When she opened them, she gazed at the snow-covered mountains with an expression of wonder. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" James said, standing beside her. "I came here for the solitude, but sometimes I forget to appreciate the beauty." Kaya touched his hand, and through the connection, he felt her agreement, but more than that, he felt her sharing her own world's beauty with him. Those twin suns setting over purple forests, oceans that glowed with bioluminescent life, mountains that reached so high they touched the edge of space. "Maybe someday I could see it," James said wistfully, "your world." The sadness that washed through their connection caught him off guard. Kaya turned to face him fully, both hands now gripping his, and the images she shared made his blood run cold. Her world was dying, the very discovery that had forced her to flee was meant to save it, but in the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. Those who pursued her wanted to weaponize her research, to use it for conquest rather than salvation. "I'm so sorry," James whispered, pulling her into an embrace without thinking. She stiffened for just a moment before melting against him, her arms wrapping around his waist. They stood like that for a long time, two lonely souls offering each other comfort against the vastness of their respective losses. That evening, as they sat before the fireplace, Kaya initiated something new. She took James's hand and pressed it against her chest, over her heart. He felt it beating, a rhythm different from human but no less alive. Then she took his other hand and placed it against her temple. What followed was the most intimate sharing yet. She showed him everything, her childhood under alien skies, her passion for science and discovery, the moment she'd realized her research could save her people, the betrayal when her own government had tried to seize her work for military purposes, her desperate escape, the damage to her pod, the terror of crashing on an unknown world. And then, through the lens of her memories, James saw himself, a figure emerging from the blizzard, gentle hands providing care, a voice offering comfort even when she couldn't understand the words, safety when she'd expected only more danger. He saw himself through her eyes and realized that somewhere in these past days, she'd come to care for him as deeply as he cared for her. When the connection faded, they sat in silence, hands still clasped, both understanding that something profound had shifted between them. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," James said quietly, "but whatever it is, we'll face it together." Kaya couldn't understand his words, but when she leaned her head against his shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, words weren't necessary. In the warm glow of the fireplace, as snow began to fall again outside, a human veterinarian and an alien scientist sat together, two hearts beating in different rhythms but somehow, impossibly, in perfect harmony. Rocky lifted his head from his bed, looked at the two of them, and seemed to settle back down with a satisfied huff. Even the dog could sense that something right was happening in this isolated research station. Something that would change everything. The hunters arrive. The peace shattered on the seventh morning. James woke to Rocky's frantic barking and a sound he'd never heard before, a deep thrumming that made the windows vibrate. He bolted upright from the couch where he'd been sleeping, giving Kaya privacy in his bedroom, and ran to the window. Three sleek crafts hovered above the clearing, their surfaces reflecting the morning sun like liquid mercury. They descended with precise coordination, and James's heart hammered in his chest as figures began emerging from each vessel. They were tall, purple-skinned like Kaya, but clad in black armor that seemed to absorb light. They moved with military precision, weapons drawn, fanning out to surround his research station. "Kaya," James called urgently, rushing to the bedroom. She was already awake, standing by the window with one hand pressed against the glass. Her expression was a mixture of fear and resignation. When she turned to look at him, her eyes were filled with anguish. She reached for his hand, and through their connection, James felt her terror. These weren't rescuers, they were the ones she'd been running from. A voice boomed from outside, amplified somehow, speaking in that melodic clicking language Kaya used. James didn't need a translation to understand the tone. It was a command, an ultimatum. Kaya responded, her voice strong despite her fear, shouting something back through the window. The exchange continued, growing more heated, and James watched as the lead figure, slightly taller than the others with red markings on his armor, stepped forward. "I don't suppose they're here to negotiate," James muttered, moving to stand beside Kaya. She looked at him, then placed both hands on his face. The connection flooded through him with desperate urgency. Images, memories, explanations poured into his mind. The leader was Commander Thane, a military officer from her world who'd orchestrated the attempt to seize her research. He pursued her across space, determined to possess the energy technology she'd discovered. With it, he could create weapons of unimaginable power, could conquer not just their world but others. He saw Kaya as a traitor for refusing to hand over her work. "He wants to use your discovery to hurt people," James said, understanding flooding through him, "and you'd rather die than let that happen." Kaya nodded, her eyes shimmering with emotion. Then she showed him something else, a memory of her destroying her research data before she fled. The knowledge existed only in her mind now. If Thane captured her, he would extract it by any means necessary. "Then we don't let him take you," James said firmly. He had no weapons, no way to fight off armed alien soldiers, but he'd be damned if he'd just hand her over. A loud pounding on the door made them both jump. "Dr. Harrison," a voice called in perfect English, startling him, "we know you harbor the fugitive Kaya, release her to us and you will not be harmed." James looked at Kaya, who squeezed his hand tightly. Through their connection, he felt her making a decision. She would surrender herself to save him. "No," James said aloud, and then through their connection, he projected the thought with all the force he could muster, "No, I won't let you." The pounding came again, more insistent. "You have 60 seconds to comply." "There has to be another way," James said desperately. He looked around the station, his mind racing. The back window, it led to the storage shed, and beyond that, the forest. The blizzard had passed but the snow was still deep. If they could reach the trees. Kaya followed his gaze and nodded. She understood. James grabbed his emergency pack, always kept ready for wilderness emergencies, and helped Kaya toward the back of the station. Rocky followed, sensing the urgency. They were halfway across the bedroom when the front door exploded inward. Commander Thane entered, his weapon raised. 2 soldiers flanked him, their alien faces expressionless behind dark visors. Thane's eyes, similar to Kaya's but filled with cold calculation, swept the room and locked onto them. He spoke in English, his accent strange but comprehensible. "Kaya, your rebellion ends now, come peacefully, or watch your human friend die." "She's not your property," James shot back, positioning himself between Kaya and the soldiers, "and she's not going with you." Thane's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Brave but foolish, you cannot comprehend what is at stake. The technology she possesses could save billions." "By killing billions more," James retorted. "She told me everything. You don't want to save anyone, you want power." "I want to protect my people," Thane said coldly, "something you, isolated in your mountain retreat, can barely understand. You ran from your responsibilities. Dr. Harrison, do not lecture me about duty." The words stung because they carried truth, but James stood his ground. "I ran from pain, you're running toward it, there's a difference." Kaya suddenly stepped forward, speaking rapidly in her language. Her tone was defiant, challenging. Thane responded, and their exchange grew heated. James could feel emotions flooding through their still-connected hands. Kaya's anger, her determination, her love for her people even as she defied their corrupted leadership. "Enough," Thane finally barked. He raised his weapon, pointing it directly at James. "Last chance, Kaya, surrender, or he dies." Time seemed to slow. James felt Kaya's anguish through their connection, felt her preparing to sacrifice herself, but he also felt something else, a building energy, a power that was growing within her. "Kaya, what are you?" he started to ask. She released his hand and stepped forward, her body beginning to glow with an inner light. The purple of her skin intensified, becoming almost luminescent. Energy crackled around her fingertips, and James realized with shock that she wasn't just a scientist who'd discovered an energy source. She was the energy source. "No," Thane breathed, his weapon wavering, "you couldn't have." Kaya spoke, her voice resonating with power, and James understood through the fragments of connection still lingering between them. She had integrated her discovery into herself, merged with the energy at a cellular level. It had saved her life during the crash, was healing her wounds. The research data Thane wanted didn't exist anymore. Because Kaya had become the research. "You fool," Thane snarled, "you've made yourself into a weapon." "No," James said, understanding dawning, "she made herself into something you can never control." The energy around Kaya pulsed, and suddenly the lights in the station flickered. The soldiers' weapons sparked and died. Even Thane's armor seemed to lose its gleam, drained of power. "Run," Kaya said, the word clear in James's mind even though she hadn't spoken. And they ran. A choice of hearts. They burst through the back door into knee-deep snow, James supporting Kaya as they stumbled toward the tree line. Behind them, shouts erupted in that alien language. Rocky bounded ahead, breaking a trail through the drifts. The forest swallowed them within moments, pine branches heavy with snow providing cover. "Keep moving," James urged, though Kaya was already pushing herself hard despite her still healing injuries. The energy display had drained her. He could feel her exhaustion through the fading connection between them. They ran for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes before Kaya stumbled. James caught her, and they half fell into a small depression behind a fallen tree. we need to rest, he said, pulling her close to share warmth, just for a moment. Kaya nodded weakly, her glow had faded completely, leaving her looking vulnerable and frighteningly pale, a lighter shade of purple than before. She pressed her hand to his cheek, and the connection reformed. Through it, James felt her fear, not for herself but for him. She showed him images, what Thane would do if he caught them, the extraction process he'd use to rip the knowledge from her mind, how he'd kill James simply for being a witness, but underneath the fear was something else, something warm and powerful that made James's breath catch. She cared for him, deeply, in a way that transcended their differences. I care for you too, James whispered, covering her hand with his, more than I thought possible in just a week. Kaya leaned against him, and they sat in silence, listening for sounds of pursuit. The forest was eerily quiet, just the occasional whisper of snow falling from branches. James's mind raced, trying to think of a plan. He knew these mountains, knew every trail and cave. There was an old mining cave about 2 miles west. It would provide shelter, buy them time. Can you walk a bit further? He asked. Kaya nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. They set off again, moving more carefully now, using the terrain to hide their tracks where possible. Rocky stayed close, his ears constantly swiveling to detect any threats. The cave entrance was partially hidden by an overhang, exactly as James remembered. He helped Kaya inside, relieved to find it dry and protected from the wind. It wasn't warm, but it was better than being exposed. He used his emergency supplies to create a small fire near the entrance, hidden from outside view but providing precious heat. Kaya sank down beside the fire, her body trembling from exertion and cold. James wrapped his emergency blanket around her shoulders and sat close, offering his warmth. She leaned into him naturally, and he wrapped his arms around her. We'll figure this out, he promised. There has to be a way. Kaya took his hand and pressed it to her heart. The connection opened fully, and what James felt made his eyes burn with tears. She was showing him a choice. She could release the energy, let it dissipate harmlessly into the atmosphere. It would destroy the knowledge forever, make her worthless to Thane, but it would also kill her. The energy had become too integrated with her biology. Removing it would be like removing her soul. No, James said forcefully, both aloud and through their bond, there has to be another way. I won't let you die. She showed him the alternative: keep running, keep hiding, always looking over their shoulders. Thane would never stop hunting, would endanger anyone who helped them, would eventually catch them. Then we find help, James insisted. There must be others on your world who oppose Thane, who want to use your discovery the right way. Hope flickered through their connection. Kaya hadn't considered that possibility. She'd been so focused on escape, on survival, that she hadn't thought about finding allies. She pulled back slightly to look at him, her black eyes searching his face. Then slowly, deliberately, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. It was clearly a gesture of deep significance in her culture. James could feel the solemnity of it through their bond. I understand, he whispered. I'm with you, whatever comes. Kaya's hand came up to cup his face, her thumb tracing along his cheekbone. The touch sent warmth flooding through him, and James realized the connection between them had evolved beyond simple telepathy. It was intimate now, emotional in a way that made his heart race. He covered her hand with his, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. The gesture was instinctive, natural, and the wave of emotion that crashed through their bond took his breath away. Kaya felt it too. He could sense her surprise, her wonder, her reciprocal feelings. Is this crazy? James asked softly, feeling this way about someone I've known for a week, someone from another world. Through their connection, Kaya showed him that on her world, bonds could form instantly. Recognition of compatible souls was considered a gift. Time was irrelevant when the connection was true. James pulled her closer, and she came willingly, tucking herself against his chest. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth, the fire crackling softly beside them. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering their tracks, buying them time. I won't let them take you, James murmured into her hair. I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way to keep you safe. Kaya tilted her face up to look at him, and in the firelight, her features seemed to glow softly. She reached up and traced his features with her fingers, learning his face through touch, memorizing him. When her fingers brushed his lips, James caught her hand and kissed each fingertip gently. The connection between them pulsed with shared emotion, gratitude and affection and something deeper, something neither could quite name but both recognized, two beings from different worlds, thrown together by chance, bound by choice. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. New horizons. The sound of approaching engines woke them near dawn. James and Kaya had taken turns keeping watch through the night, huddled together for warmth. Now he felt her tense against him as the thrumming grew louder. This was it, Thane had found them. But the ships that appeared above the cave entrance were different, sleeker, with markings in silver rather than the black of Thane's vessels. 3 crafts descended, and James instinctively moved to shield Kaya, ready to protect her with his life if necessary. Figures emerged, purple-skinned like Kaya but dressed in robes rather than armor. The leader, a female with elaborate markings on her face, raised her empty hands in what seemed a universal gesture of peace. She spoke in that melodic language, and James felt shock ripple through Kaya. "What is it?" he asked. "Who are they?" Kaya gripped his hand, and through their connection, he understood. These were scientists from her world, members of the research council who'd opposed the military seizure of her work. They'd been searching for her, following the trail of Thane's pursuit. The leader approached the cave entrance slowly, speaking again. Her tone was gentle, respectful. Kaya responded, her voice shaking with emotion. A rapid exchange followed, and James caught fragments through their bond, explanations, apologies, offers of help. Finally, Kaya turned to him, placed both hands on his face, and showed him everything. The council had evidence of Thane's corruption, his plans for conquest. They'd been building a case against him but needed Kaya's testimony. More importantly, they had the resources to extract the energy safely, to preserve both the knowledge and Kaya's life. They could save her world without weaponizing the technology. "Then you should go with them," James said, though the words felt like they were tearing something vital from his chest. "You can finally go home." The anguish that flooded through their connection matched his own. Kaya showed him images, her world, beautiful but not home anymore, not without him. She showed him staying on Earth, building a life here, but she also showed him the suffering of her people, the slow death of her planet without the energy solution. "You have to go," James said firmly, ignoring the pain in his heart. "Your people need you, your world needs you." Kaya's eyes shimmered, and James realized she was crying, tears that looked like liquid silver tracking down her purple cheeks. She pressed her forehead to his in that gesture of profound connection, and through their bond, she asked a question. Could he come with her? James pulled back, stunned. What, leave Earth, leave everything? She showed him possibilities, humans and her people working together, sharing knowledge, building bridges between worlds. She showed him a role he could fill, using his medical knowledge to help understand biology across species. She showed him a future where he wouldn't have to choose between her and his world. "But I'm just a veterinarian who ran away from his problems," James said. Through their connection, Kaya showed him how she saw him: compassionate, brave, someone who'd risked everything for a stranger, someone who'd given her not just medical care but hope, someone who'd reminded her that connection and trust still existed in the universe. "I don't know if I'm ready," James admitted. Kaya showed him that she understood, that the choice was his, that she would respect whatever he decided, but she also showed him her hope, her wish that they could face the future together. The council leader called out again, clearly wanting to move quickly before Thane discovered their location. James looked at Kaya, at this extraordinary being who'd crashed into his isolated existence and changed everything. He thought about the past 3 years, hiding in these mountains, running from pain and responsibility. "You know what," James said slowly, "I've spent 3 years avoiding life. Maybe it's time I started living it again." The joy that exploded through their connection made him laugh despite everything. Kaya threw her arms around him, and he held her tightly. Rocky barked once, as if approving the decision. The next hour was a blur of activity. The council provided translation devices, allowing James to communicate directly. They explained that Thane had been arrested by loyalist forces, his soldiers taken into custody. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he would face trial for his crimes. More importantly, they offered James a formal position, ambassador and liaison between Earth and their world. His research station would become the first point of contact, a bridge between species. He could help Kaya refine the energy technology, ensuring it was used to heal rather than harm, and he could travel between worlds, maintaining ties to both. It will be dangerous, the council leader warned through the translator. There are others like Thane who resist cooperation, who see humans as primitive. I've handled difficult clients before, James said with a slight smile, though they usually had 4 legs. As they prepared to leave, James took one last look at his research station. 3 years of isolation, of hiding from his pain, it had served its purpose, but he was ready to move forward now. Kaya took his hand, and through their connection, he felt her gratitude, her affection, her excitement for the future they would build together. No regrets, James asked her. She showed him an image, the two of them standing between worlds, neither fully belonging to one or the other, but creating something new, something beautiful, a bridge built on trust and understanding and love. No regrets, James agreed. As they boarded the alien vessel, Rocky at their heels, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope. The universe had proven to be far larger and stranger than he'd ever imagined, but it had also given him something precious, a connection that transcended species, a purpose that extended beyond his own pain, and someone to share it all with. The ship lifted off, leaving the snow-covered mountains behind. Through the viewport, James watched Earth grow smaller, his old life receding. Kaya stood beside him, her hand in his, their connection a constant warm presence in his mind. You know, James said, I always wondered if there was life out there, never imagined it would crash land on my porch. Through their bond, he felt Kaya's amusement. She showed him an image, her pod falling through Earth's atmosphere, her desperate hope that she would find help, that someone would care enough to save a stranger. I'm glad it was you, James said softly, I'm glad the universe brought us together. Kaya leaned her head on his shoulder, and through their connection, she echoed the sentiment, 2 lonely souls from different worlds, finding each other across the vast emptiness of space. It seemed impossible, but then again, the best things in life often were. As the ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, carrying them toward a future neither could have predicted, James Harrison smiled. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't running from something. He was running toward it. The end.